Welcome back to Cross-Strait Chronicles. We turn complex cross-strait history into stories you can actually enjoy. Grab a seat, relax, and let's travel back in time, across the strait. In the last episode, we explored the life of Sun Yat-sen, a village boy who studied medicine, then decided the real patient was the Qing Empire itself. Sun spent decades organizing uprisings against the Qing government. Most of them failed. Actually, almost all of them failed. But his ideas kept spreading, especially his famous political philosophy, the three principles of the people. By the early 1900s, revolutionary networks were growing across China. Secret societies, students returning from Japan, military officers, urban reformers, all of them increasingly convinced of one idea: China needed a republic, not an emperor. And in 1911, history finally caught up with that idea. Because today's episode tells the story of a moment that ended something that had lasted for more than 2,000 years. Not a dynasty, not a government, but an entire political system. For over 2 millennia, China had been ruled by emperors, dynasty after dynasty, from the Qin to the Han to the Tang to the Ming, and finally, the Qing. But in 1911, that system collapsed. And the fall did not begin with a grand declaration. It began with something much smaller, a bomb accident in a quiet city called Wuchang. And from that explosion, an empire disappeared. Segment 1. An empire running out of time. By the early 20th century, the Qing Dynasty was in serious trouble. And when historians say serious trouble, they mean the kind of trouble where everything is breaking at once. The government faced several major crises: foreign pressure, financial debt, internal rebellions, and widespread distrust from its own people. The Boxer Rebellion had already humiliated the empire. Foreign armies had marched into Beijing. The Qing court had fled the capital, and China had been forced to sign the extremely expensive Boxer Protocol. The empire now owed enormous payments to foreign powers. To raise the money, the government increased taxes, which made people very unhappy. And unhappy citizens rarely make stable governments. Segment 2. Reform comes too late. Ironically, the Qing government finally realized it needed reform. After decades of resisting change, the court began implementing the late Qing reforms. Modern schools were opened. The imperial examination system, which had existed for over 1,300 years, was abolished. Plans for a constitutional monarchy were announced. On paper, these reforms sounded impressive. But there was a problem. They arrived decades too late. By 1910, many Chinese reformers had already lost faith in the dynasty. Instead of fixing the system, reforms only convinced people that the system had been broken all along. Segment 3. The railway crisis. And then came the issue that finally ignited widespread anger. Railways, yes, railways. Not exactly the most dramatic revolutionary symbol. But in 1911, railways became the center of a massive political conflict. Local investors across China had funded railway construction projects. But the Qing government suddenly decided to nationalize these railways. Why? Because the government planned to use them as collateral for foreign loans. In simple terms, local investors paid for the railways. The government took them, and foreign banks would profit. People were furious. Protests erupted across several provinces. The railway protection movement spread rapidly, and once large numbers of people begin protesting, revolutionary groups start paying very close attention. Segment 4. The Accidental Spark. Then something completely unexpected happened. On October 9th, 1911, revolutionaries in Wuchang were secretly preparing an uprising. They had bombs, they had plans, they had underground networks, but they were trying to keep everything hidden. Unfortunately, one of the bombs accidentally exploded, not during the revolution, during preparation. Imagine planning a secret uprising and accidentally blowing up your own hideout. The explosion exposed the revolutionary network. The authorities began arresting suspects immediately, which forced the revolutionaries to make a sudden decision. They launched the rebellion one day earlier than planned, and that accidental uprising became known as the Wuchang Uprising. Segment 5. The Domino Effect. Something surprising happened next. The Qing government expected the rebellion to be crushed quickly, but instead, other provinces began declaring independence from the Qing Dynasty. First one province, then another, then another. Within weeks, more than a dozen provinces had broken away from imperial control. It was like watching dominoes fall across a map. Each local government faced a choice: stay loyal to a collapsing empire or join the revolution. Many chose the second option, and suddenly the Qing Dynasty was losing control of China faster than anyone expected. Segment 6. The Missing Leader. There was one strange detail during all this chaos. The revolution's most famous leader was not even in China. Sun Yat-sen was in the United States raising funds for the revolutionary movement. He learned about the revolution from a newspaper. Imagine spending years planning a revolution and finding out it finally started while you were on another continent. Sun quickly returned to China, and by December 1911, revolutionary leaders elected him provisional president of a new government, the Republic of China. But the revolution still faced a major problem. The Qing Dynasty still controlled a powerful army. Segment 7. Enter Yuan Shikai. To resolve the crisis, revolutionaries turned to one of the most powerful military figures in China, Yuan Shikai. Yuan commanded the Beiyang Army, the strongest modern military force in the country. Both sides wanted his support. The Qing court hoped Yuan would crush the revolution. The revolutionaries hoped Yuan would help end the dynasty. Yuan realized something important. Whichever side he supported would win. So he negotiated, and his conditions were simple. The emperor must abdicate, and Yuan Shikai would become president. Segment 8. The last emperor steps down. At the center of the Qing court was a small child, Puyi. He had become emperor at the age of 2, which is roughly the age when most children are still learning to walk, not run an empire. On February 12, 1912, the imperial court officially issued an abdication edict. The Qing dynasty ended, and with it, China's imperial system, which had existed for over 2,000 years, disappeared. Remarkably, the transition was relatively peaceful. The imperial family was allowed to remain inside the Forbidden City, at least for a while. But politically, the empire was gone. China had become a republic. Segment 9. a revolution without stability. However, ending a dynasty did not automatically create a stable country. In fact, the years after the revolution were extremely chaotic. Yuan Shikai became president, but soon attempted to declare himself emperor. That plan failed dramatically. After his death, China entered the warlord era. Regional military leaders controlled different parts of the country. National unity collapsed, and the political struggles that followed would eventually lead to the rise of the nationalists, the rise of the communists, and the long conflict that shaped modern cross-strait history. Segment 10, Why the 1911 Revolution Still Matters. So why does the 1911 revolution still matter today? Because it fundamentally changed the idea of political legitimacy in China. For centuries, power had come from the mandate of heaven. Emperors ruled because heaven allowed it. But the revolution introduced a different concept. Government should exist because people choose it. Even though the Republic of China struggled in its early years, the idea of republican government never completely disappeared. And today, both sides of the Taiwan Strait still interpret this revolution differently. But they agree on one thing. 1911 marked the end of Imperial China and the beginning of the modern political era. The 1911 revolution did not begin with a grand national uprising. It began with political frustration, economic protests, and one accidental explosion. But those events triggered a chain reaction that ended the Qing Dynasty. Within months, a system that had lasted over 2,000 years collapsed. China became a republic. Yet the revolution did not solve every problem. Instead, it opened the door to decades of political struggle that would shape the future of China and Taiwan. Now we'd love to hear your thoughts. Here's today's question. Was the Qing Dynasty doomed to fall? Or could it have survived if reforms had started earlier? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this video helped make cross-strait history a little less confusing, consider giving it a like and subscribing. History is complicated, but learning it doesn't have to be. I'll see you in the next episode.